Welcome back, World History class. We are week 5, day 4 of distance learning. I hope everybody's doing well. We're on the home stretch. So, for some of you guys, this will be your last lesson of the year. So, just hang in there. You got this. You're almost home. I hope everybody's staying safe, that you're being nice to your siblings, not driving your parents crazy. Without further ado, today we're talking female pioneers. Specifically, we're talking about Margaret Thatcher and Indira Gandhi. Thatcher and Gandhi were both the first female prime ministers of their countries. Ladies, notice there's no American on this. And that's not to say there haven't been female pioneers. There absolutely have been plenty, but as you guys know, I can't talk about the first female president just yet. So these slides there's a lot of writing on them. So if you prefer just to pause it and read them yourself, that's fine by me. So first, we're going to talk about this lady, Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Hilda Thatcher, sometimes called Baroness Thatcher of Kesteven, born October 13th, 1925, in Lincolnshire, England. She died in 2013 in London. She was a conservative party politician and prime minister, Europe's first woman prime minister, and the only prime minister in the 20th century to win 3 consecutive terms, and at the time of her resignation, Britain's longest continuously serving prime minister since 1827. She sped up the evolution of the British economy from statism to liberalism, and she became the most renowned British politician since Churchill. Notice it says by personality as much as achievement. She was certainly more than just a political figure. She was a cultural icon, whether you liked her or not. Her grandfather was a man named Alfred Roberts, who himself owned a grocery store and was an alderman, went on to be a mayor. We just talked about alderman in government class. It's basically a city councilman. And Beatrice Stevenson is her mom. She decided she wanted to be a politician, and she got good enough grades to go to the University of Oxford, one of the best schools in the world. She studied chemistry and got involved in politics, eventually becoming one of the first woman presidents of the Oxford University Conservative Association. In the U.S., we have people who have conservative beliefs and liberal beliefs. Liberal is associated most closely with Democrats. The word conservative is usually associated with Republicans. In England, they actually have a separate political party called the Conservative Party. So they have the Conservative Party and the Labor Party. After graduating, she worked 4 years as a chemist and studied to take the bar to become a lawyer. She practiced as a barrister, and she got married around this time in 1951. Had twin sons, son and a daughter. Excuse me, twins, son and a daughter. She, of course, was head of a student organization, the conservative organization, but she tried her hand at actual politics for the first time in 1950. She ran to be a member of parliament, but was not elected. Now, even though she wasn't elected, she showed a lot of promise as a conservative leader because she vastly increased the conservative vote. So it wasn't enough to get her the victory, but still. Eventually, she enters the House of Commons, and we won't worry too much about the X's and O's of British politics, but she enters the House of Commons and just continues to rise through the party. She's secretary in the Ministry of Pensions and National Insurance. She was an advocate for educational reform. She was Secretary of State for Education and Science when Edward Heath was PM. So when she was in the cabinet of Heath, even that being somewhat of a landmark, she wasn't the first woman to hold a cabinet position. It says portfolio, just position in a conservative government. She was one of the first. Thatcher is remembered, by some as being a very noble, um, effective leader, but she did some things that drew criticism, especially from the Labour Party or the more liberally minded Brits. So, for one, she got rid of a program that gave free milk to school children, called her Thatcher the Milk Snatcher. She did create more comprehensive schools, which that was initially a Labor Party concept. The idea being that it would open poorer kids to a good education, working class students. Heath lost two elections, so Thatcher was the only minister prepared to challenge him for party leadership, right? Heath had been the leader of the Conservative Party in England for some time, but he was just no longer an effective candidate. So Thatcher is now poised to become the prime minister. She was elected in 1975. So they won a big victory in '79. They were coming off what they called the Winter of Discontent, where there are a lot of labor issues and a lot of strikes. Thatcher was a big believer in greater independence of the individual from the state. State, in her case, meaning country. She wanted to end what she considered excessive government interference in the economy, including privatizing certain state owned enterprises and selling public housing to tenants. Reductions in expenditures on social services such as healthcare, education, and housing, limitations on the printing of money, et cetera, et cetera. The term Thatcherism came to refer not only to these policies, but also to certain aspects of her ethical outlook and personal style. Thatcher was a big believer in what we call moral absolutism. She was extremely nationalistic, and she was a real advocate for the rights of individuals, at least the freedom. for individuals to live without excessive involvement from the government. So she was just kind of a classic conservative in that sense. When she took office, she already had a weak economy. So she comes in, she eliminates some regulations and subsidies or like government payments to businesses. So she's able to purge manufacturing of some of the inefficient firms. In other words, she's able to put them out of business. But if you're putting these firms out of business, then you're going to have a lot of people who are unemployed. So unemployment skyrockets. Output fell sharply. Just the economy was in really bad shape. Um, but she continued with this plan to privatize these state owned industries and public services, including aerospace, television and radio, gas and electricity, water, the state airline, and British Steel. She felt like the government should essentially be a giant corporation. Um, by the end of the 80s, uh, the number of individual stockholders had tripled, and the government had sold 1.5 million publicly owned housing units to their tenants. Still, employment was bad. It remained bad, and we started to see social unrest in England. It was looking like she was going to be defeated, but two things happened. A, there was a war between Britain and Argentina, and B, the Labor Party, which remember, those are the liberal counterparts to the Conservative Party. Excuse me, the Conservative Party. Um, but sorry, guys, I got an important text message from Ms. Hoover. Um, yeah, so two things: the Falkland Islands War. So apologies. Wartime presidents or prime ministers tend to do well in re-elections. During war, there is often like a surge in patriotism, at least initially. So she's able to ride that energy and take advantage of the fact that the Labor Party was uh, not in good shape. So she won in the biggest victory since 1945. One thing Thatcher did was she opposed unions. Remember, she was all about privatization of industry. She thought that the government's previous treatment of union strikes had been ineffective. So the government under Thatcher puts in some new rules to undermine the union's ability to strike, including laws that banned the closed shop, required unions to poll their members before ordering a strike. In other words, wouldn't let union leadership just unilaterally make decisions, right? Because a union member, sure, if the union leadership says they're striking, then they're going to strike. But if you put it up to a vote, maybe you know, Joe Brown, who's working at the factory, maybe his union leader wants to strike, but he needs that money. So um, basically, the idea is she just wanted to weaken these unions. In '84, the mine workers union started a strike. Um, Thatcher was planning on closing 20 coal mines that the government had deemed unproductive. and the miners do a walkout, and it lasts for a long time. It really sort of is a when it says it's a emblematic of the struggle for power. That means this was literally a standoff that lasted almost a year, and it was labor. In other words, the National Union of Mine Workers and conservative, or Thatcher and her government. We might not make it to Indira Gandhi. That's okay. A terrorist bombing at a Conservative Party conference in Brighton, which was part of the Irish Republican Army, almost killed her, but she survives. And by the end of Margaret Thatcher's second term, few aspects of British life had remained unchanged. The post war reforms of the Labour Party, a lot of them were dismantled by Thatcher. In foreign affairs, the Falklands War really provided an opportunity, or was the arena in which her relationship, professional, of course, political, with Ronald Reagan could be seen. If I've if this stuff has sounded familiar, Thatcher's mentality towards government, etc., it's because we just talked about Ronald Reagan, and a lot of their stuff, a lot of their policies parallel each other. So Thatcher and Reagan made it the decade of conservatism. Both the United States and England were under conservative control. And they were both, another thing they shared was they were extremely anti communist. Of course, the Soviet Union was the communist superpower. So Thatcher and Reagan really bonded over their mutual distrust and disdain for the Soviet Union. So this treatment, or this viewpoint of Reagan and Thatcher, that the Soviet Union was an evil empire, that's going to remain. That's going to keep the Cold War going, and then eventually Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power, and we all saw yesterday the well, no, I guess that was U.S. history class, but U.S. history class watched Reagan's famous Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. So her anti-communist rhetoric and speeches earned her the nickname Iron Lady in the Soviet press. This next one is on your homework for today, but she was a big believer in NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In Africa, she presided over the establishment of an independent Zimbabwe, which had previously been Rhodesia under British control. But all of her foreign policies weren't popular. One example being when she opposed the international sanctions against apartheid. Right, we talked about apartheid on Monday or Tuesday. That was the policy of segregation in South Africa. So she definitely was not. I think her supporters would likely disagree, but She was not exactly a champion of people's liberty. I'm trying to think of a better way to say that. Second half of her tenure as prime minister was very controversial, in that Britain was clashing with the EC. Thatcher, again, she didn't like contributing such large sums to the greater European community. She felt like British money, should be spent in Britain. Remember, she was highly nationalistic. And then when she gets elected a third time, she became more and more hostile towards European integration. She felt like those were federalist continental trends towards a single currency and a deeper political union. Well, guess what? She was largely right, because we now have the euro, and all of that stuff. Although, I suppose if she hadn't passed away, Margaret Thatcher would be thrilled at Brexit. Britain has a very interesting, complex relationship with the rest of Europe. So um, that's been going on for a long time. So Margaret Thatcher at this point, she was still a very popular figure, at least among the right, among the conservatives in England and those in America who were paying attention. But in '89, she puts in a poll tax, and that was a pretty extreme measure. I mean, poll taxes, that's something that was used like in the Jim Crow South. I mean, basically doing everything you can not to let poor people vote. So, of course, people didn't like that. And the Conservative Party realized, wow, that was such a disaster, the poll tax was, that we're just not sure Thatcher could be reelected. And people felt like the public at this point was like, you know what? Even those who had a more nationalistic viewpoint about what Britain's government should be doing, even they felt like Thatcher was. Many of them felt like Thatcher was sort of excessively hostile um, towards outsiders. So in 1990, the Conservative Parliament members, so members in her political party, um, started to move against her. She defeated her opponent, a guy who had been defense minister, but she was 4 votes short of the necessary majority plus 15%. That's the rule in England. And she decided she was just going to call it a day. She didn't want to run for reelection. Indira Gandhi. Most of us have heard the name Gandhi. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Oh, rats. Not a lot of us have heard who Indira Gandhi is. This lady. That's a cool look. The single silver thing. I'm going to do that. So, Indira Gandhi, we'll move super fast because we're running out of time. She was an Indian politician, and she was the first female prime minister of India. She served three consecutive terms and a fourth term before being assassinated in 1984. Like Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi attended Oxford, and she joined the Congress Party in 1938. So Margaret Thatcher was a member of the Conservative Party. Indira Gandhi was a member of the Congress Party. The Congress Party came to power when her father took office in 47, and Gandhi became a member of its working committee in 55. So in 59, she was elected to be party president, but party president didn't carry a lot of weight. It was largely just a title given to honor someone. Her time as prime minister. Gandhi was named leader of the Congress Party, of course, so she became prime minister. And in a compromise between the Congress Party's right and left wings, she was put in because she was considered somewhat of a moderate leader, at least at that point. But the right wing of the party was never satisfied that she was doing enough. And this plays out in a number of ways, including Gandhi having to work with a deputy prime minister who had different beliefs than her. Eventually, she was expelled from the party. So she decided to join a majority of party members that called themselves the New Congress Party. In 71, the New Congress Party dominated. They won victories in all kinds of elections over the old Congress Party or the more conservative. When Pakistan was defeated by India, that created Bangladesh. And Gandhi, was the first government leader to recognize Bangladesh as being a new nation. So she was involved in meaningful politics going on. In 72, she leads him to victory again in certain state legislative assemblies. But they eventually find out that she had violated election laws. So the High Court of Allahabad ruled against her, which meant she would lose her parliament seat and would have to basically sit in timeout for 6 years. Took it to the Supreme Court, but did not get a good response. So instead, she declared a state of emergency. She imprisoned all her political opponents and assumed emergency powers. Ruthless. A lot of new laws were enacted that limited personal freedoms. During that period, get this, she implemented several unpopular policies, including large scale sterilization as a form of birth control. My goodness. Her 2 years of emergency rule didn't. It really rubbed people the wrong way. They knew they were being mistreated. So the Janata Party is going to take power in '77. We're running out of time, so we'll keep moving. But essentially, she lost political power, and then she was able to make her way back into being the political leader of India. However, um, she died in an airplane crash. Excuse me, he died in an airplane crash. I misread that. Um, Indira was continually faced with threats to the political integrity of India. And there were these states, several states that wanted independence from the central government of India. So she had her work cut out for her. Tensions between the governments and the Sikhs, who comprised most of the rebels, caused her to order the army to attack and get the separatists out of a conflict they had occupied. Um, Ruined shrines, killed at least 450. That's the government estimate. The Sikhs say she killed more than that. And eventually she was killed in her garden in New Delhi. She had bodyguards, and they were Sikh, and her own bodyguards killed her. Rajiv, her son, took over and served until 1989. All right, guys. Hopefully, I can make this camera look at me. Let's see if I can do that. Well, I don't think it's going to, but let me just say if this is the last lesson you learn, if this is the last one you log in for, it's been a pleasure. I hope you guys all have an awesome summer.